Okay, good morning again. I've been thinking about trust lately, trust and distrust. In many quarters, distrust is very big these days. Distrust of science, distrust of government, distrust of institutions, distrust of any form of authority. In some contexts, this would be all very healthy. But today, it provides a breeding ground for conspiracy theories, many of which are simply outlandish, but some are really dangerous. Certainly true in the US, when a sizable portion of the population in the US believe that the election was stolen, or when some say that the January 6th event was engineered by Democrats to make Trump look bad, or when some even suggest that January 6th was just visiting tourists coming to the US Capitol. Well, when this kind of thing is said or believed, then American democracy is under a question mark, and this affects all of us. And here in Toronto, for many months, every Saturday, Lee and I saw from our apartment window a parade of people carrying signs saying things like, "Away with masks, end the oppression, give us freedom, reject the hoax, vaccines are dangerous," and so on. Now, I mention all this about trust and distrust, not because I have a final word to say here, but implicitly to raise the question, in what or in whom can we trust? The Psalms raise this question over and over again, and the Psalm appointed for today, which we didn't actually read, Psalm 111, answers the question bluntly. All the precepts of God's law, the psalmist says, are trustworthy. But of course, the meaning and relevance of those precepts have to be thought through in different times and different circumstances. And that's why, according to today's first reading, Solomon asks God for a wise and discerning mind. And according to the biblical account, Solomon was gifted with such a mind. So how does all this translate for us today? Discerning is a key word. Discerning what is right, discerning what is just, discerning whom to trust. Something we all have to deal with. Reflecting on the matter of trust in my own personal experience, I have a few observations to offer. First, in family life among friends, among those whom we work with, in our community here at Holy Trinity, and in our society as a whole, mutual trust is what everything depends on. If trust breaks down in a marriage, for instance, the marriage is in jeopardy. And so with our whole society. Secondly, and this is a different point, placing trust in another person gives power to that person, for better or worse. Here's a good illustration. I think of Lee's mother demonstrating huge trust in her son, Norm, Lee's brother, who has cerebral palsy. And because of that trust and confidence placed in him as he was growing up, he was enabled to do great things and become, like Marilyn Dolmage, with whom he's closely associated, become, among other things, a leading advocate for the so-called disabled, not only in Canada, but internationally. So trust can be really empowering. Now, trust does involve risk, as I implied a moment ago. Not everyone who is trusted proves worthy of trust. Think of Donald Trump and his credulous disciples. Still, the overall point I'm making is that trust, mutual trust within a group, can release a lot of energy and creativity. For a time, some years back, I worked on Niagara Institute seminars on human values and organizational life. These were for senior executives in business and government. I worked with, among other people, Max Clarkson, who was then dean of the business school at the University of Toronto. He believed deeply that in business, leadership that worked deliberately, not artificially or for narrow self-interest, but deliberately and honestly at building trust, would be rewarded with increased creativity and a really good work environment. So, probing the issue of trust further, I come to this related question. What do we value most deeply in our lives, in our world, in our leaders? I've been reading a recent book by an economist named Mariano Mazzucato, who departs from conventional economic theory that says moral questions have no place in economic discussions, that the metrics of the market are value-free. I've had discussions with economist friends over the years who make that point emphatically, that discussions related to economic matters need to be seen as value-free. So it's refreshing and encouraging to hear an economist or to read an economist like Mazzucato question that assumption, question that, and say that the question of value needs to be the starting point of discussions about economic matters. And Mark Carney, former governor of the Bank of Canada and the Bank of England, in his recent book, makes exactly the same point. We have to decide what we value and then shape economic and political institutions in accordance with what we value. And Carney, for instance, is now focusing on questions of climate change, something that big oil has put aside as a threat to its bottom line. And we all know that big oil has had huge influence on public policy. So I put the question again, what do we value most in our lives, in our world, in our leaders? Well, in the Christian tradition, and not only there, but certainly there, we value every single human life. Every single human life counts. And everything that depreciates that value, discounts it, threatens it in any way, needs to be opposed. Everything that nourishes and sustains human life is vital. John's gospel speaks of Jesus as the bread of life. And when we pass the consecrated bread around at the Eucharist and say, bread for the journey, that journey entails responding to the person at the personal level and the political level, to the needs of those in our human society. That conditions in our world seem to deny on a massive scale the value of human lives doesn't alter our commitment. And the fact that, as Edward Kennan says in this morning's Star, that we live now in an apocalyptic age doesn't alter our commitment. Rather, it demands that it be stronger. And that's why at Holy Trinity, we attempt to feed the hungry who come to our doors. That's why the Refugee Committee continues the work of helping refugees, individuals and families, come and find a secure home in Canada. That's why the Sanctuary Coalition is willing to work for months, even years, to make sure that an individual's refugee claim is heard and receives a just and humane response. And at the same time, of course, we have to address those structures and conditions that create these needs in the first place. I recently read a review of several books just published about my all-time favorite novelist, Fyodor Dostoevsky. At one point in his life, Dostoevsky was imprisoned for what the authorities deemed to be revolutionary activity, and he was sentenced to death. It's a famous story. On the day of his execution, after the first group of dissidents had been shot, Dostoevsky awaited his turn. And then at the very last moment, his sentence to death was commuted, and he was instead sentenced to time in Siberia. With that experience, those moments of waiting for his execution made Dostoevsky realize that every single moment in one's life is a gift to be treasured. And what mattered most for Dostoevsky, and I'm quoting the reviewer here, is what we can do for another person right in front of us right now. That's the imperative we confront, to respond to the person we face right now and to respond to the oppressive social and economic structures we face right now. And we respond trusting that we will be sustained by the bread of life. Amen.